broadly, I think there's three ways that you could identify the conclusion of the argument. Or there's at least three different tools that I have in my tool belt that I'm thinking about when I'm trying to identify the conclusion of the argument. The first is if they say something that sounds unlikely to me, or that sounds, if they say something that seems arguable, let's put it that way, then I don't know that that's the conclusion, but my ears do perk up, right? If they're attacking somebody, if they're saying that something is good, if they're saying that something is bad, or if they're making a prediction about the future, then I'm going to go, how do you know that? What's your definition of good? What's your definition of bad? How can you predict the future? And I start asking all of these aggressive, controversial kind of questions. By doing that, I'm homing in on whether that's the conclusion of the argument.
Yep. It's a prediction. That's what it is.
Yeah, making a prediction. But yeah, it's the smell test kind of. It's like, wait, what now? Bertolt Brecht did not make successful dramas?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Yeah.
Second thing is, are they using keywords? This is where people like novices or people who took like one shitty LSAT class, they tend to want to go to keywords. They're looking for thus and therefore and so. Those are all things that introduce a conclusion, or they're looking for because or since or for. These are words that can introduce premises, and they're looking only at those guideposts and trying to sort out what's the conclusion and what's evidence. That works sometimes, but if it's your only tool, you're going to be in real trouble, because on many of these arguments, they're not going to use any of those keywords at all. They're just not giving you those guideposts. And if you can't see the guideposts, then you got to get there another way. And my third thing is, real simply, some of what they gave you is meant to be evidence, and some of what they gave you is meant to be the conclusion. So you kind of have to reorder the things in your head to think about, well, which one of these statements would be good support for one other of the statements? And you just kind of rearrange it in your head a little bit. For me, it can be useful to say, because of, and then you read one of the sentences, and then I say, therefore, and then I read the candidate conclusion. Like, I think this might be the conclusion. Therefore, and I read that statement. And if it makes sense, if it makes sense in that order, then I go, oh, I see. They meant to use this evidence to support this conclusion.
Yeah.
Again, three things. One, skepticism about value judgments or predictions about the future, or anything that just seems like, wait, how do you know that?
Yep.
Two, look for those keywords. If they're there, they can be helpful. Three, and this is ultimately really what matters, take all of the statement combined, look at all the different pieces of it. The evidence was meant to support one of those claims. And if you can juggle it around and rearrange it, I'm not saying that they're going to prove their case, but they are going to try to make a case. And it would only really make sense in one order. It would not make sense in any other order. And so the thing that makes sense after the therefore would be the conclusion of the argument. Anything to add to that or subtract?
Yeah. Well, no, I agree with everything you said. The one thing I want to expand on, and I think is problematic for people, is when it comes to using those keywords, people need to understand everything that they do, those keywords tell them, and everything that those keywords don't tell them. I think that's where people get into a lot of problem, right? So for example, they see the word thus. They know enough to know that that's introducing a conclusion, but they wrongly assume that that's got to be the main conclusion.
Or that it has to be immediately followed by the conclusion, right? Because we see weird constructions sometimes that are going to be like, thus, comma, because XYZ, comma, and then they'll say their conclusion.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there is some definitive stuff you can glean from those keywords. The test writers don't say therefore after presenting, they must have presented some evidence before that. You can't start a logical reasoning passage with
Therefore.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, but that's only, I guess that shows you how kind of fungible or how unnecessary those words are. Because I've said for a long time, well, you can present the elements of an argument in any order and it doesn't affect the logic of the argument. But that is a point where no, you wouldn't be able to lift that question. If the conclusion actually did use the word therefore, then you would not be able to just rearrange that and put it in the first sentence of the argument. But you could take that sentence and slap it up there as the first sentence of the argument. You just remove the therefore.
You would remove it. So these words are, I agree 100%, not necessary, but they are helpful as long as you understand them exactly. And that is, okay, it's telling me that the author's trying to conclude something from something else, but I don't know whether that's the main conclusion or an intermediate conclusion on the basis of that word alone. And that's where people take the words too far. And that's a problem. They need to then rely on that other skill that you were talking about. And that is just understanding, how do these sentences relate to each other? And do I think this is ultimately being used as evidence for something else? Or is it the end all be all? Is it the main conclusion?